Tonight's fable. In a certain place was two kingdoms living side by side. And in the first, the people lived simple, direct, and quiet lives, pursuing only activities beneficial to their physical well-being and survival. While those in the adjoining land were vocal, reflective, with lives much more complex, aimed at ends less easily identified, and with the added strange singularity of them being capable of and given to activities that by any reasonable observation seem detrimental to their own self-interest. In a sense, man is a creator, in that through his mind he conjures up the sensation of reality. It is indeed a well-balanced, fine-tuned, self-fueling dynamic, in that, inasmuch as without the human intellect there is no reality, and without the perception of reality, nothing for the intellect to do. Humor and the human animal. One man said, "Words make me laugh." There's 3 items here. When his turn came, one man stood and said, "And in spite of all that's happened, I remain one of Europe's leading museums." Thank you. While in contrast, to help test his theory, every morning before he awoke, this one man would silently sneak out of bed and go to his workshop, where he kept 2 long wooden poles, originally of equal length. And he would cut an ever so small amount from the end of one of them, then slip back into bed, and later that day return to the shop, where he would carefully examine the then unequal lengths of the 2 poles, scratch his chin, and say, "Most strange, most strange indeed." Humor and the human, what you call it? His memory, man believes, will protect him from many things, but his genes are not one of them. Part of the quirkiness in trying to distinguish and describe those involved with activities such as this from just everyday folks is that the actual distance between Paris and Istanbul is not what it's plotted to be. For questions of distance and measurement are aspects of reality and the mind, not of life and one's understanding. Thus, a certain sort of hazard in attempts to specifically detail non-standard states of consciousness, but also why standard minds continue to try and do so. It's as though people who know they're never going to stray far from home feel better being able to talk about exotic places by name. In the eyes of the simple, you can see a pulley connecting them to the external. Also often in their smiles. A man who cannot think beyond spatial and temporal considerations cannot think to full capacity. In reality being what the mind makes of life. Life is not linear, though reality may seem so. Routine neurology and children's television. Peering down into his open skull at the 2 sides of his brain, one man exclaimed, "Oh, it's the Bert and Ernie show." Another distinction between routine visitors to the amusement park and the aliens is that the former get dizzy and disoriented if they get off of the merry-go-round. Query: how can you tell the difference between an ordinary superhero flying through the air and a mystical one? The mystic's cape precedes him. And a man with his mouth stuffed full of sticky cotton candy mumbled, "I don't get it, but I don't care, as long as I can attend to my earthbound hungers." Reality is external, life not. A more perceptive man's attitude toward the everyday affairs of human existence could be sort of summed up in these words. You know, I don't give a damn, and even if I did, I still wouldn't. And a privately held attitude, need I add. And at a nearby clinic, one doctor's nearby advice is, feed a cold, starve an idiot. The sophisticatedly simple believe that education, for those simply less so, will render them less dangerous. Though it's not hard to live, it is hard to remember to try and live in some specific manner. One mystic at first had printed on his business cards the message that all talk is useless, but quickly realized how little interest this would generate, so changed it to some talk is useless. And in an apparent show of agreement, his partner added, every little bit is meaningless. Only reality can engage in self-destructive behavior, never life. The collective sees through one set of common eyes, while the more demanding find the situation blinding. Once you realize what makes up man's conception of an external world, you will then understand why he cannot make any ultimate sense of it. The secret is not in the ship, nor in the waters it sails, but where the two meet. The future is not actually now, but rather a matter that some now live in the future. In re, the mind and reality. Without the mind, no reality. In re, consciousness and reality. Consciousness sees beyond reality. The simple's prayer of appreciation. Thank God for a faulty memory. The lure and hold of the external game. Life instills in all the need to keep your eye on the ball. Those who would expand their vision must be able to see both the stadium and the spectators and be able to grasp their ultimate intactness in spite of all appearances to the contrary. The great mythical battle is not between good and evil for control of man's soul, but between his stomach and his own determination for control of his consciousness. The more perceptive have no allegiance at all to reality, only to life. The simple are hypnotized, then slain by the local. Your only escape is through the stars. In the Yellow Pages, one mystic listed his business as brain surgery without a scalpel. Education, external. Understanding, otherwise. Cynicism, comprehension with the humor removed. While the screeching voice of the simple can paint off a wall, the sonorous one of life, to the ears of the perceptive, can strip ignorance from info, the camouflage from the secret. One man asked a mystic, "What is the greatest waste of time?" "You mean besides reality?" he replied. A man struggling to develop his own individual state of consciousness is like someone standing apart from the crowd, but with nowhere actually to stand. Genes are to life as neurons are to reality. Now do you get it? After some years of studying with a certain mystic, a man asked him, "Is there something you're still not telling me?" "Yes, lies," he replied. A passing hobo told a dissatisfied kid that the solution to all problems is to run away from home. And my latest verbal distillation of there being reality and then life. And we are not correcting, second-guessing anything having to do with any of the academically based philosophical arguments as to what constitutes reality. I have given you a working definition of it already, that reality, no matter whose, no exceptions, no footnotes, no asterisks, no parentheticals, that reality is what the mind makes of life. And any question you ask after that simply reveals your inability to see what I'm talking about. There are several aspects that are useful in the kind of area we've been talking about based on this description. Reality is all external. No matter what a man's mind may say otherwise, if you think about, after all we've been through and the understanding that I'll assume that all of you have, that is at least in some ways non-standard, is not absolutely gravity-bound, reality is all external. Now, an ordinary mind will turn back around and even think about that and go, well, no, it's not. And as always, if nothing else, the proof of its correctness is the fact that it's thinking about what I said, the definition I gave of reality being all external. And an ordinary mind thinks, well, wait a minute, I'm reflecting on that. I took that, I said, wait a minute, and I took it internally, and I'm now pondering it for some length of time, at least long enough to deny it. So, it would say that all reality is not external. It is. Once you understand that there is no division, there is no such operable equation past the point of reality, such as mind of I plus not I, to believe, to operate on the basis as you must, when you're operating something by the natural mind, to the degree to which the mind has been ignited already, the only way that the mind operates is to have somebody to push against, have something to push against, have somebody to dance with, have somebody to dance against. And that is always a feeling of something external. Even when the mind turns around, and we all know that everyone's mind, ordinary people, believes it thinks, and I'm not saying it doesn't, but if I say all reality is external, if I start off with an ordinary, civilized, sane, educated mind, person, and I say reality is external, if I tell them first that I make a division between reality and life, that they're not the same thing, and they go, okay, go ahead, and I say, all right. Another aspect is that reality, based on my division, is all external, and life is not. And they might even let that slide and say, well, go ahead, is there more? What's the point? If I then press it and say, well, consider what I just said, that all external, before we get into the opposing that I say life is otherwise, did I just say all of reality, whatever you call reality? And the person says, okay, whatever you or anyone else calls reality is external. What do you think of that? Now, consider it a little bit further. And they go, oh. And they go, well, that's not true. I mean, if you're going to get technical, if you want me to follow your suppositions to some sort of theoretical conclusion, or for us to debate it, you're right. I must absolutely disagree already, because his own mind believes that it is doing something internally by even pondering my statement that all of ordinary reality is external. Even when the mind is thinking, it is what? It is being tied. It's the pulley that you can see in the simple man's eyes. His conception of what is real and what's going on, once you can see it, you don't need IQ tests for people. But if you need more than a cursory glance, as a matter of fact, just look in an ordinary man's eyes, if he starts any sort of serious conversation, and maybe just a serious comment like, oh yes, I couldn't agree more or less, all you got to do is look in his eyes, and there is a direct belt to the external. After that, it's of no consequence. That would fall into the realm of psychology and sociology. Then they would want to debate, well, wait a minute, you mean that perhaps some of what he thinks is too closely driven by external events, obviously of the past, but of external events. Now you're saying something specific, not specific. I already pointed out there is no exceptions to this. What everyone's mind conceives of as being reality, whatever they want to call it, compared to what life itself is reality is always external. And it is not a philosophical game. It is not a verbal sport that I'm playing. Once you realize that, then everything you've ever thought, everything that the mind thinks in general collectively of humanity, you can never see the same way. It just changes the whole. You move to a different stadium. Even if the mind continues to want to kick the ball around, you are now in a new stadium and you can't go by the old rules. I mean, somebody wants to kick the soccer ball from the old stadium into yours, and you realize, yeah, I know, and you can't really do it. It's just, it is not the same anymore. The external, what everybody calls the external, the reality is all external. And sometimes people even would refer to the external world, the world of events. The world, all the terms I use, the everyday world, the city world, city life, the routine affairs of man. All of that is external. Ordinary people's minds, the more sophisticated they are, the more they would vehemently disagree with that and say that at best it is some sort of inseparable combination, the connection between the external and a man's internal being so complex, so convoluted, so intertwined as to probably defy any understanding, which of course is not true. It's just as simple as dog doo-doo on the street. You just look and there it is. You can step on it, you can pick it up, you can debate how it got there, you can debate, where is it from, what sort of animal, you can do anything you want to, but my friends, there it is. Ordinary minds cannot stop there. If ordinary minds did stop there, we're back to this, if you'd like to look at it this way, they are on a direct belt drive with the external, and if an ordinary man's mind could stop, if in some way the kinds of dreams that someone who knows some secret or has some altered state of consciousness could turn around to other people and go, here, I'm going to whip it on you, I'm going to give you a dose of it, it wouldn't do them any good. And many of you and ordinary people have some unwitting experience along such lines through psychedelic drugs, that it is as though your mind went out of ordinary gear. And many people believe, I'm on the verge of seeing directly into life, or whatever they had been already programmed to believe, that whoever was taking them on their trip, like, you may, if this is really a good trip and these are good mushrooms or good acid, it's very likely you'll peer into the nature of the universe. You go, wow. And so if it is a good trip, it is almost as though your mind will stop, sometimes meditation, sometimes even pot. But then it's a matter of then what? And with an ordinary person, there is no then what. It's just blank. Not only is it blank, they cannot abide the state. Not that they have a choice, but they cannot abide the state because the mind has quit working. It is tied directly to out there as they perceive it. There is no difference. They can describe it. If I've already taken their position for them, I could describe it. I could defend it. I could attack my own statement about what constitutes reality. But the mind sense of reality is out there. There's not much more I can say specifically. I'm going to get around the edges and try to sneak up on you. But there's not much more you can say directly about that because the mind simply says no. Because the mind seems to be in your brain, in your head, and if I say the mind sense of all reality, just all reality is external. Think about it. And you go, all right. And that seems to be prima facie physical, literal proof that I'm wrong. Because the mind goes, all right, well, I'll think about that. And you're doing it internally, and so it's not true. All such analyzation at the routine level came about through what? Apparent education from external, that is, that you had to be a thief. And so no matter what the mind says what the ordinary mind says in response to any question about, wait a minute, that's not true. For me to say that the ordinary mind is based upon theft. Without theft, there is no ordinary mind. And the man goes, do you mean that metaphorically? And I say, no. Let's get past all that. It's just a fact. He goes, well, that's not a fact. Because he just thought about it. But anything you just thought about is based upon thievery that came from, apparently, the external world. We're still talking, in general, if it helps at all, about originality. Consider now, just based upon that short notation, that all of man's institutions are, in fact, by all appearances, externally based. All of his institutions, therefore, by their very nature, can never satisfy internal needs, internal hungers. Once you realize that there is absolutely no specific use in attacking a religion, all religions, politics, economics, philosophy, anything that the mind has invented which constitutes, I repeat, or is the external world, that man has apparently invented it. It is not a requirement for physical survival. Anything that he has invented himself, apparently, is now an external phenomenon. But once you realize that is limited to the external, and it's his sense, it's based upon his mental sense of reality, which is not life, is not undivided life. Once you realize that, then you understand that anything based upon the external concept of reality is by its very nature, by its very construct, no exceptions again, it is unable to satisfy anything internally. There's no way it can ever explain it. Put it to you another way. As long as your sense of reality, if your mental sense of reality is in any way based upon the external, you can never make sense out of it. You're not supposed to, collectively. The merry-go-round would break down, the fuel rods would burn out, etc. But for people who believe that they are sincerely involved with some sort of mythical or mystical search, and it is still tied to the external world. And there are many ways to describe that, and there are one or two that's usually distasteful enough to satisfy most people, as long as you believe that that which you're looking for is out there somewhere. You're doomed. Not from the ordinary view, because you're not supposed to find it, but to believe that man's institutions, which are an external phenomenon, to believe that they in any way can ever feed, satisfy, pacify, fulfill any real internal need. And by real, now I mean someone who has a hunger to understand what's going on in life, not to argue, not to get on a debate team, not to become famous for sticking their tongue out at life, not to become famous for being a supporter of the status quo, which all of that's the same thing. It's external that most people in the middle of the road start out wanting to be famous and recognized by their betters. And what you realize is almost everybody must come to the realization it's not going to happen. Then you play like, well, screw them. Now I'll become a critic. I'll stand outside and I'll piss inside their tent just because they won't let me in. I should change that up from whoever it was, General Grant or somebody, from tent to mansion. I mean, they won't let me in. They won't let me in the country club. Then I'll stand outside and piss in the door at them. It's all the same thing. You are absolutely wasting your time, and it is not physical. It is not a matter of social position. It's not a matter of education. But as long as you operate on the basis which you're supposed to, as long as your consciousness is on that pulley out there, and that one, you can look at it either way. At any particular time, it's as good. It doesn't matter once you understand. You can say that the wheel's being driven out there, the pulley, and it's doing here, or you can say it's doing it here, which is part of what gives a sensation that people go, no, I do think. Yeah. Think about what? The only thing they can think about is external matters. Oh, they can think about what they think about external matters. Okay. Anytime you have any doubt, maybe this helps. Several people seem to enjoy this. It's just one possible example. Ask yourself again rhetorically, why are there no movies, television shows, popular entertainment of any kind having to do with ideas in the widest sense? Don't look for an exception and try to make something fit. Just look at what is, always has been, the common forms of entertainment in life. Now, I'm not trying to pull the most common denominator, not just slasher movies, but everything from slasher movies on up to what's considered to be wholesome family entertainment in movies, television, popular fiction. To believe that there's a distinction between mad chainsaw serial killers and rapists, between that and a Walt Disney family movie, to think there's a great deal of difference, you're not looking. You're blinded. You're still looking at reality. Because they all have to do simply one thing. The only thing the simple can think of to do is to write about the stomach. Now, I've been using that to cover several areas you must understand by now. But that's it. What else? What songs are they going to write? I know they end up writing about sex, but it's all the same thing. All they can write about is from here down. It's the only interest they really have. And when you are still limited to writing at the survival level, at the physical level, then everything is out there. Because you cannot physically live without the out there. If we're going to do my drawing again and cut off man for the sake of our discussion through this level of consciousness, right, through the cerebral, my line, and from here up would be the mind, from here down the body. From here down, it only has one reasonable interest, one beneficial interest, or one area. It's out there. Because the body cannot physically consume itself. It cannot screw itself. It cannot procreate alone. It requires something out there. It requires a sex partner to keep the race going, that is, somebody externally. It requires food gathered externally to keep you going. If you're in a particular environment in which the body cannot adjust itself, its temperature and etc. to survive, then the external again is important. You've got to go find a place to get in from the cold or to get in from the heat. So to say that the external is important to the body, well, that's ridiculous. It is just self-evident. Everything that the body needs is external. That's it. But once you go above this line, as always in discussing things verbally, we're dealing with that grand world of binary energy. And even though it's not all-inclusive, immediately once you can see one side of it, you can see that the other side, that is from here up, or maybe it'll help, that's what I was going to hope and hint, is from here up. It's what I'm saying is from here up, the external, even though it appears otherwise, is not. And the reason it appears otherwise, as always, is that at the ordinary level, a man's mind is being run by his stomach. It's being run by his digestive system. Until you realize that, I don't know what you're going to do. Because you can sit around and think, well, today I'm thinking better thoughts. Today, or tonight, sitting here listening to you talk, it seems to make more sense. Isn't that strange? Some nights it does and some nights it doesn't. It's your goddamn digestive system, that's all. That does not sound mystical, and it doesn't. Some people could take it as being a slap at you, or me just say, well, you're just imagining you're getting better. If you're imagining you're getting better, then you're right. You're just imagining you're getting better. I mean, there's your proof. And the doctor at the clinic repeated. He gave his prescription. Feed a cold, starve an idiot. But see, at least you waste your money trying to deny, that, or wanting your money back from the clinic like he wasted your money. If he says starve a cold, feed a cold, starve an idiot, if you have to go, then don't worry about whether this prescription might have some application to you. Don't waste your time. Don't threaten to sue him for malpractice or malprescribing. If you have to go, wait a minute. There is no wait a minute. Except in reality. There is no wait a minute in life. At the ordinary level of thought, the only thing the mind has to deal with, trying to encourage you again, I keep hinting and writing little things about it, but at the ordinary level, everyone, Buddha, Jesus, all your heroes, nobody was born otherwise. I was describing last time in one sense that to first think life teaches you, be a thief. And I was describing on the basis that you must steal what you know, apparently, from out there. At least metaphorically speaking, that is, a child, as opposed to the other creatures, a human child, must be tutored specifically in things that are singularly human. This is the ordinary view. Things that humans would not learn. Speech, etiquette, civility, concern for your fellow man. All the things that ordinary minds would say make a human human, rather than just some kind of ape that's got a bigger brain and stands upright. But to make a human truly human, you've got to be more than just some sort of combined output of all these genes. Even if we do have a neural cortex and we do have a larynx and we have all the equipment so that we can now speak and we can deal in, as they call it, abstractions and etc. Still, humans believe, the ordinary mind believes they would take my description, at least metaphorically, that you must steal. You must be a thief. Well, let's look at it another way. Rather than me just saying it's external, which I was going back to anyway, but look at it this way, is what I've been hinting in another direction recently. The real place that you steal, in a sense, the first place you steal, is below the line of consciousness. Surely it's simple enough. Einstein could not have had a great thought without a blintz. You can cut it any way you want to. Buddha would have never understood. He would have never had the enlightenment if he hadn't had a good fig sandwich every now and then. It could have been one. Well, never mind, it could have been. It had to have been. That's the first place you steal. Also, again, I know I periodically mention it, notice that people who aspire to be mystics of some sort and don't really know what to do, one of the things they do besides, I point out, sex and abstention, but notice they will also try and deprive them, or will deprive themselves of food. In other words, just the opposite, in a sense. That I will focus my attention, I will make my mind more worthy of enlightenment by torturing the stomach. It's not absolutely ill-founded. I mean, there is a modicum of reality to that. And the truth is, in Paris, if you want to get to Istanbul, a modicum, and probably $1.25 now, will get you, you know what, a cup of coffee. And perhaps somebody may even say, oh yeah, the train's down that way somewhere. Next. The original theft, the most direct theft, is from the stomach, from the body. When you understand that, when you actually see it, and then you understand that everything that the mind thinks, there is no exceptions, there is no profit. It's not even possible, but there's no profit. I don't know how else to describe it. We'll see. To taking what the mind thinks in any manner seriously. And you cannot corner your own mind and get it to tolerate this, to entertain it, to say, listen, everything you think is it's a waste of time, it's ill-founded. Now you know that will not work. It will not work. I've slipped in several to you recently, if you didn't get them. I described the ultimate, the greatest example of a waste of time. And the definition was, generally what your mind's up to. Then last time, if I recall, I slipped in one that one guy said he'd about concluded that the attempt to make yourself individually more conscious than is normal, than you're just naturally born with, he said it may be like the ultimate test to see how far you can go without driving yourself crazy. And that's not bad. Which is where I just was verbally, if you weren't following it, is trying to tell your own mind that, you know, you're a waste of time. Nothing personal with you, because you shouldn't be any more angry or upset at your mind than you would be the size of your nose or your ears, and all of us, whatever, physical characteristics you don't care for about yourself. Most of you are supposed to be grown boys and girls, and you're supposed to kind of be over that. Or if you're not over that, you're old enough that you should have made enough money to go surgically have it altered. But if not, you should also be in the same kind of position, or at least I'm hinting now, or telling you now, there's nothing to criticize in your mind. It's a waste of time. But the mind is not driven by that which could be called, I'll just make up something again, superconscious energy. It is not, the mind will not lead, the mind does not have the power, the mind, no matter what your thoughts are, does not have the capacity, it simply does not have the ability to become more enlightened, to experience that kind of awakening. It's just no secret, even though I know how hard it is to understand, and it sounds like you talk in circles, but everything that's always been called, the enlightenment of the expansion of consciousness, the awakening of another level of intelligence, the liberation of one's mind, which sounds great, and it doesn't ever say liberation of what. Well, if anybody tells you what the liberation of the what is, then you can ignore them, pay them for a cup of coffee, and move on, because they don't know. But it is a kind of liberation. It is a kind of freedom. It is a kind of enlightenment. But then to say from what or to what, the only thing I can tell you, the only thing reasonable to tell you now, it is not the mind. The Enlightenment, let's use the good old classic one, is not a mental process. It happens in the nervous system up here, but it is not a mental process. It is not a matter of, well, I will slowly or quickly, doesn't matter, I will rearrange my thinking. I will correct my thinking. No, there's no correction of it. Not having to do with this. It might be a correction if you're having to work as a mathematician or a programmer or something. But there is no correction of the mind that has anything to do with the enlightenment itself. Then you realize what I was trying to lead you back to, that everything out here, see, does that cover it? All right, well, all right. Why hold back? Everything out here. Well, I agree with you. It's, I think, as Dr. Horney would have said it, kind of, perhaps it represents anal attentiveness or retentativeness. For me to say all of out here, why hold back? All of out here. Once you realize that it is all on the same footing, it is what I'm trying to give you a useful description. It is reality. Not life, just assume that I mean something that's useful. All of you that survived this long, surely you found that any description I give, if you screw around with it long enough, it actually gets useful. That you can actually get something personal. I'm not saying there's a difference between life, which is, and reality. And I've already warned you, don't say, wait a minute, which reality? My reality? Somebody? No. Reality is what the mind makes of life. That reality is all external. No matter what the mind tells you, it is external, and on that basis, to look out there, for the mind to be driven on that pulley, which it cannot stop it. If the pulley stops, the mind stops. And so you can't go any further with that. But as long as you think that out here, as long as the mind still considers that out here is of any importance to what you're trying to do. It is certainly of importance to eat out there. It is certainly of importance to find your way home. It's certainly of importance if you're living in conditions wherein you must pay taxes. Then it's good that you can add and subtract. All the things that the mind should do. But insofar as attempting to do something on your own consciousness, to develop your own consciousness past the point that you are naturally have been driven thus far, to do that, the mind is of no benefit. Reality offers no solution. None. None, 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 none. And you waste your time not only keep looking, but if you keep looking, you're also always going to be caught up in criticism. Because you look at the very we're in charge of increasing consciousness, and you go there and they can't help. And if you're operating by the mind, we could say that you have a certain degree of propriety in feeling like, well, you misled me, to put it nicely. There is nothing in reality that will cure itself. There is nothing in a man's mind, a sane man's mind, that will destroy itself. And yet, may I tell you a fable? Some of you may have heard this long ago. In a certain place were two kingdoms living side by side. And in one of them, the people lived simple, quiet, direct lives, pursuing only activities that were physically beneficial to their own well-being and survival. But in the adjoining land, the people lived lives that were much more complex. They were vocal. And the ends, the aim of their existence seemed to be much less capable of identification. And in fact, they would pursue activities that by any reasonable observation, appeared to be detrimental to their own self-interest. Put it to you bluntly, the question should have always been, should still be, the question. Why is it arranged to where a man's mind, compared to his body, is capable of and inclined to engage in self-destructive activities? The mind. Now that is still aimed toward ordinary people, because outside the ordinary you'd have people actually doing things physically self-destructive. Suicidal people, people on drugs, alcohol, People, so you understand, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the ordinary heart of humanity, the sane, civilized parade of progress. In such people, the same as in animals, they do not engage in any behavior that is self-destructive. Animals do not drink, they do not go out and distill alcohol, they do not eat food, they do not attack, we're talking about normally, as you know, they do not attack animals that they cannot eat, they do not wander into the lair, the den of those animals that eat them. They do not engage in behavior other than that is beneficial, physically beneficial to their own well-being and survival. That's it. Now, to take from the level of consciousness down in a man, to call it the same that we share much with our fellow creatures, in that same way, if you are a sane, ordinary person, you do not engage in activities. Now, forget up here for a minute, forget your mind, that a person should not. I know this is getting iffy, but all right, should not. You can buy this. That he should not, a sane person, forget whether they're involved in some strange activity, but just a sane person should not be engaged in any kind of activity that is physically detrimental. They should not be drinking poison, etc. But then consider the singular aspect of man is mind, and the question. Why is it arranged? To what purpose? To what end? That man's mind, the crowning glory, as somebody used to call it before they shot him, or they suspected if they let him live any further he would turn into a romantic or metaphysical poet. And the 1700s and 1800s had their fill of that. But at any rate, the singular characteristic of man, the one undeniable uniqueness of man is his mind. Now, that's obvious to anyone. Then, the question, what's going on that the mind can engage in activities that by any reasonable observation, not mine, everyone's mind does it to somebody else, it turns around to other people, and you can, just as fast as you can talk, you could come up with examples. If I said, is it not true that large segments, just people constantly out in the ordinary world that seem to be otherwise sane, will suddenly engage in activity that, no matter how you look at it, is detrimental. Somewhere between slightly detrimental and just self-destructive. Remember, not just physically. Now, it may turn out, it may manifest itself, etc. But they will engage in things up here that by no observation can you say that is beneficial. Thinking in that way, what you just told me, the way you think about things, in no way, by any reasonable observation, can you say that that is worthwhile, that in any way can benefit you. It's not the kind of thing open to a great deal of argumentative persuasion to another person, because they will simply insist, well, I'm right. And if you don't see it, then you're the one that's wrong. These examples is people who, again, you can get misled, distracted, if you don't see that it is not a physical phenomenon. But I was going to point out the physical manifestation of it would be people who swear that they are engaged in mortal combat with their neighbor over philosophical differences, over religious differences, etc. Now, I know it gets sticky because then people say, well, it is physical. No. And if you get a little bit better, it is simply, how about this? Now, this almost sounds like, though, that we're still physical, that's psychosomatic illness, but how about people that I could say, or that ordinary people, psychiatry, so we'll say, this type of person, this kind of personality, a man who's always arguing, and these kind of people that have a certain kind of personality, they will develop ulcers, and it turns out if we talk to them long enough and get them to describe their inner life, they'll say inner life, that they will say that yes, they're continually feeling as though the rest of the world is primarily composed of, intellectually speaking, imbeciles. That they will sit and argue with the radio, the television, the prime minister will come on, a pope, a rabbi, and they will admit that they will sit there and just fume, or they'll read the paper and talk back to letters to the editor. And so they'll say, all right, that is a physical manifestation because they have bleeding ulcers, or they have stress, their blood pressure is such that they could have a stroke. Back to this. It's not psychology, as you know by now. But that would not be happening. I'm not denying the physical symptoms. But would a creature without a mind ever get in a philosophical debate? Would they ever get into a theoretical argument in their own mind with another creature? Do lions sit and ponder the folly of leopards? I mean, how could they have come so close to actually being a lion? And look at them. I mean, they kind of stop and they're still spotty and they never get a uniform color and they're too small. Like, how pretentious. I mean, you've got to be somewhere that they've got to be mentally stunted or they would have gone ahead and grown up. Or, I guess, a hippo looking at a warthog. I'm saying, well, you poor dwarf. You anomaly. It is only the mind. Now, let's go back and take the ordinary descriptions. You should be able to do better because I mean it in a more refined manner. But how about the idea of psychosomatic illness, stress, ulcers, or even behavior that seems to involve more than one person? Somebody beating up on their spouse or their mother or the father, that kind of violence that doesn't seem to be or is not, by their own admission, based upon physical self-defense. That, yeah, I hit her, I hit him because of what they said, because of the way they treat me. Not physically, but the way they intellectually treat me, the way they verbally treat me. All right, let's take ordinary people. Ordinary minds will go along with that, but they would still attribute, they would say, well, it's physical, but you do see. I mean, they will pay it lip service and say, well, yeah, we know they've got mental problems. We know that they've got some kind of psychological problems, which is what the term psychosomatic illness means, is an illness caused by the mind. So we know the mind's involved. Yeah, they say that. But if you said, well, if it were not for the mind, there would be no human problems. They go, well, that's not true. Yeah. Well, sure it's true. I mean, it's just as true as the doo-doo. Well, see, maybe some of you stepped in it before you noticed it. But it's just as true and blatant, salient, obvious, point blank as that. There are no human problems without the mind. There aren't, and all of it is based upon what is perceived to be the external, which is the tricky part, because then the same people I was talking to go, wait a minute, you keep getting confused because we just point out that psychosomatic illnesses, these kind of ulcers and high blood pressure, is caused by people's minds. Yeah, but their mind thinks it's caused from out there. And then you've lost them. Now, I mean, they're going to dismiss you because it seems like, well, you're trying to run me in circles or I didn't follow it. Yeah, they did. It's just as obvious as hell, except you're not supposed to see that. There's no need for an ordinary person to see it, because if they did, all that would happen temporarily is the belt would slip off. Which happens many times, and some of you probably already, I'm sure, had it happen, whether you had occasion to see what was going on, that you were trying to talk to someone that you thought had some possibility, and you talk to them, they go, yeah, and suddenly it's like, maybe you understand it now, it's like a belt slipped off, a pulley, and it's like they just... And you realize, well, I lost them. And in your, I'm sure, well-meaning way, many people, you'll say, wait a minute, you were following it pretty close there, but what happened? How did I lose you? And they don't know what to say. It's just that the belt, the pulley slipped off, and it's like everything went. Part of my attempted description of the potential usefulness of realizing this can be looked at as a two-headed assault, a potentially two-payoff prize ticket, as you first realize, or second, is you realize that out there are no problems. And you can't say that to mind. You don't tell your mind that. But there are no problems out there. That is not it. Not up here. The problem out there would be physical. And we're way past that if we're just assuming that everyone is physically sane and upright enough that you can look after yourself without doing yourself a great deal of harm physically. Not talking about that. You know that. It's up here. It's the only place that a man has any potential to change in a way that is individually of any significance, that will in any way give him an individual payoff in return on his effort. Unless you're simple. And if you're simple, go to the gym, lose weight, get plastic surgery, buy new clothes. There's nothing wrong with that, which is all they can do. That is what, you just look out there and there is the external world. Everyone else, you can say, well, the whole world is trying to reach enlightenment. All sane people are. Yeah, they are. And the best they can do, have a few drinks and try to pick up a new sex partner. Buy a new car. Buy the latest clothes. Go to the latest joint. Nothing wrong with it. But it is all driven by out there and vice versa. But if you realize it for what it is, no editorial comment, you just realize what the external world is composed of, what it's based on, what it's constructed of. And it's no secret. There's nowhere to look out there. This constructs it to start with, to take that one view. When you realize what it's constructive of, then you understand there are no problems out there, nothing's amiss. Not theoretically, it is just nothing is amiss when it's nothing but an interpretation of what's going on. Then you realize also, part of the payoff, there is no place, there is no room whatsoever to be disappointed, to have any degree of fault-finding, backbiting, criticism, playing what-ifs. There is nowhere to look out there and think, woe is me. Or how did I miss it? How did the church let me down? How did my family let me down? How did my teachers, how did my first 3 wives or husbands let me down? How did my children let me down? How did the church? How did the world of academia? How does science? Nobody's letting anybody down. I point out also in tonight's that another distinction between people attempting to do this sort of thing and the ordinary visitors at the amusement park is that the ordinary visitors, they get dizzy and disoriented if they get off the merry-go-round. That's when you see that look. Back to a piece of why I was pointing out. Contraire, if we took an ordinary person and could snap them out of being bedazzled by the never-ending, if you can suddenly snap them out of it, or they come out for a second, again, you haven't done them a favor. It's just another description of what I was saying. Is that look like that they got off of it momentarily, and that caused them to be dizzy. Should we leave on a low or a high note, or are you getting good enough that it doesn't, that you don't take it personally? Let me make a third possible payoff to that sort of thing, or at least 2.5, a subdivision. Not only do you give up any, there's no criticism. It's just not possible. It doesn't exist. There's nothing in reality, that is the external world, that can let you down. If your mind in the external world is on that pulley that it's supposed to be, it can't let you down, it can't help you up, it can't do anything. It just is. It just goes round and around and around. But I was going to say a subdivision of that, of realizing that there is institutions, the ordinary world does not let me down. It's not possible. There's nothing amiss. There's nothing to criticize out there because they can't do anything. And from a more anxious and demanding man's perception, the do anything, of course, is to give me the answer, to give me some sort of extraordinary nourishment. Tell me the secret. By God, slap me into enlightenment. There is nothing in the external world that can slap a man into enlightenment or to be more conscious. Not even close. But I was going to say a subdivision of understanding that and being freed from any form of disappointment, criticism, down almost no notice of the external world. Here. Remember we're talking about here. Beyond that is a certain kind of real hard-nosed, hard-ass, jarhead, mythical warrior type encouragement, good news, to wit. Not only is there no place, no form of disappointment, no basis for any disappointment from out there, there is nothing that can help me out there. That's why I said I gave you a choice that You can think, well, that's really encouraging, or, boy, what a bummer. Because then if you're ordinary, well, you're still kind of left, well, why the hell am I listening to you? I guess because I glued your ass to the seat of the chair and caught these people on TV and welded their tuning knob to the channel that I show up on. Yeah, right. There have been many attempts for ordinary minds to say, well, I'm not going to let the external world get me down. And that can range from just ephemeral sore-headedness of somebody just suddenly got disappointed in a love affair or a business deal or something and just go, to the world. All the way from that to people philosophically or even in the area of psychology trying to come to some sort of intellectual understanding and some intellectual explanation that perhaps the effect that the external world's had on me could be lessened, perhaps in some way through analysis, through whatever method is the latest, that I in some way can help free myself to, gradually, to varying degrees, from this kind of negative impact that my past environment has placed on me. It's like hoping forever that a splinter will work its way out of your finger. Or that if you let a toothache go long enough, that it will finally cure itself. And what else do you want? It's like, well, maybe. It's just, in a sense, a great deal of relief, plus you want to look at a great deal of responsibility. It's almost like good news that most minds could not stand to comprehend, even if they heard it. That is, to understand, well, there's nothing is wrong out there. There's nothing to complain about. Nothing up here. And also to realize, well, nothing out there is going to tell me what I want. There is no help out there. I described, last we'll close, a mystic you could describe as someone attempting to stand away from the crowd. Someone who is, or at least attempting, and yet that has no particular place on which to stand. When that's true, then you're getting somewhere. Yeah. But it's like you've got to dance on hot coals, which, again, that sometimes everybody knows the passing interest. It's thousands of years old, but it's revived now that you go take some self-help course or something and then walk across hot coals, rolling up your Armani suit and taking off your Gucci shoes, and you suddenly do it instead of an Indian faker. The walking on hot coals, that's just a simplistic version. Really, walking on hot coals is a man trying to awaken his consciousness, and no matter where he steps, he keeps telling his mind, and no matter where you go, and you keep trying to, you think, well, I do want to get away from the crowd. I know that the way I've been thinking won't do me much good. Maybe if I stand over here, no. Well, how about over here? No. Well, how about, hey, well, this is no. That's walking on hot coals. But then, for those of you that know anything about the history of the Indian fakir, you have to go from walking on hot coals to the Indian rope trick, because you finally realize, well, I can't stand anywhere, and you've got to begin to start being able to levitate. Intellectually. In case anyone in TV land's actually expecting me to start flying.